The conference hall was filled with important people from all over Earth. They had come to the space station called Genesis Prime, floating high above the planet. Everyone was excited because today was special. Today, humans would meet aliens for the first time. The room buzzed with whispered conversations and the clicking of cameras. News reporters stood in corners broadcasting to billions of people watching from Earth and the colonies. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. Marcus Chen stood on the stage like he owned the world. In many ways, he did own a large piece of it. He was a billionaire who had created Translingua Corp, the biggest translation company in human history. His software could translate any human language into any other language in seconds. It had made him incredibly rich and incredibly famous. Behind him, giant screens showed his company's stock price going up and up. Marcus smiled his perfect smile and looked out at the crowd. He wore an expensive suit that probably cost more than most people made in a year. Everything about him screamed success and confidence. He raised his hand and the crowd went quiet. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice smooth and practiced. "In 3 hours, aliens will arrive at this station. They call themselves the Zentari. They are the first alien species we have ever encountered. Their language is completely unknown to us. But I promise you this, my translation software will decode their language in minutes." The crowd clapped politely. Some people looked impressed. Others looked skeptical. But everyone was listening. Marcus pulled a small device from his pocket and held it up. In fact, he continued, "I am so confident in my technology that I am making an offer right now. Anyone in this room who can translate the Zentari language faster than my system can have my job. They can have my company. They can have my entire fortune, everything I own." The room erupted in shocked whispers. People turned to each other with wide eyes. A few linguists in the audience exchanged glances, but nobody moved. After all, Marcus Chen had the most advanced artificial intelligence on Earth. His system had processed every human language that ever existed. What chance did any human have against that kind of power? Marcus looked around the room with satisfaction. "No takers?" he asked with a smirk. "I thought not. The age of human translators is finished. Artificial intelligence has made them obsolete. From now on, machines will do the talking for us." He was about to continue when a voice cut through the silence. "I will take that bet." The voice was clear and strong. It came from the back of the hall. Every head turned to look. A young black woman was walking down the center aisle. She wore a simple blue jumpsuit, the kind that maintenance workers wore. Her hair was pulled back in a practical bun. She had no fancy clothes, no expensive jewelry, nothing that marked her as important. On her chest was a name tag that read, "Keisha Williams, Maintenance Crew." Marcus watched her approach and his smile faltered for just a moment. Then it returned, but this time it had a sharp edge to it. "And who are you?" he asked. His tone was polite, but anyone could hear the condescension underneath. Keisha stopped at the front of the room and looked Marcus straight in the eye. "I am someone who speaks 17 languages," she said calmly. 6 Earth languages including English, Spanish, Mandarin, Arabic, French, and Swahili. 4 sign languages including American Sign Language and International Sign. 3 programming languages including Python and C++. And 4 languages I learned from old colony transmissions that most people have forgotten about. Scattered laughter rippled through the crowd. Some people thought this was funny. A maintenance worker challenging a billionaire. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "That is impressive, Miss Williams," he said. "But the Zentari do not speak any language you have studied. They are aliens. My system has been trained on universal grammar structures, mathematical language theory, and pure linguistic patterns. It can find patterns in any communication system. Tell me, do you have a PhD in xenolinguistics? Do you have any degree at all?" The question hung in the air like an insult. Keisha did not flinch. "No," she said. "I do not have any degrees. I washed out of the Space Academy. But I have something your machine will never have. I have human intuition. I have pattern recognition that evolved over millions of years of human survival. I have the ability to read body language, to understand context, to sense emotion and intent. Your machine can process data, but it cannot understand what it means to communicate. Language is not just about words. It is about connection, understanding, and trust." Marcus' face hardened. His smile disappeared completely. "Fine," he said coldly. "You want to embarrass yourself in front of the entire world. Be my guest. When the Zentari arrive, we will both attempt to translate their language. The first one to hold a meaningful conversation with them wins. He paused and leaned forward slightly. But I should warn you, when you fail, you will be looking for a new job, and I will make sure everyone knows that you failed. Keisha's expression did not change. She stood there calmly, looking at Marcus with steady eyes. When I win, she said quietly, your company will be used for something better than making you rich. It will actually help people communicate. Deal. Marcus stuck out his hand. Deal, he said. They shook hands in front of hundreds of witnesses. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. The whole thing was being broadcast live across the solar system. There was no backing out now. Both of them had made their promises in front of the world. In 3 hours, one of them would be proven right and the other would lose everything. The crowd erupted in excited chatter. People pulled out their phones to place bets. Within minutes, betting pools had formed all over the station. Most people gave Keisha less than a 1% chance of winning. After all, she was just a maintenance worker with no formal education going up against the most advanced AI system ever created, and the man who built it. But if anyone had looked closely at Keisha's face, they might have seen something there. Not fear or doubt, but determination. She had spent her whole life being underestimated. People had always told her she was not smart enough, not educated enough, not good enough. She had heard it at the Space Academy when they kicked her out. She had heard it from family members who said she was wasting her time learning languages. She had heard it from supervisors who thought maintenance workers should just clean and not think. But Keisha had always known something that others did not. True communication was not about being the smartest or having the best tools. It was about genuinely wanting to understand another person, or in this case, another species. It was about listening not just to words, but to everything beneath the words. It was about seeing others as conscious beings with thoughts and feelings, not as problems to solve or data to process. As the crowd slowly dispersed to prepare for the alien arrival, Keisha walked back through the conference hall. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were steady. She had made a choice, and now she would see it through. Behind her, Marcus was already setting up his elaborate display of screens and computers. He had his team of technicians running around, checking systems, calibrating sensors. He was treating this like a performance, like a show he was putting on for the cameras. But Keisha knew the truth. The Gentari were not coming here to be decoded like a puzzle. They were coming here to meet humans, to see what kind of species lived on Earth. They would judge humanity not by its technology, but by its character. And that was something no machine could fake or simulate. Over the next hour, something remarkable happened in the receiving bay. While Marcus' screens continued to produce increasingly complicated translations, Keisha sat down on the floor with the 3 Gentari. It was not the formal, stiff interaction that everyone had expected. It was more like watching 2 groups of people trying to get to know each other. The conversation was slow and often confused. Keisha would make a gesture and hum a tone. The Gentari would respond. Sometimes they would have to repeat things 5 or 6 times before understanding clicked. But when it did click, when understanding finally happened, everyone could see it. The Gentari colors would brighten. Keisha would smile. They would both make similar gestures, showing that they had found common ground. The real breakthrough came when Keisha realized something important. The Gentari language was not just about the sounds or the hand movements. It was about emotion. The same word could mean completely different things depending on what color their skin turned and how fast or slow their hands moved. It was a language that required reading body language, understanding context, picking up on subtle social cues. In other words, it was deeply and fundamentally similar to how humans actually communicated. Even though the Gentari were not human at all, this was not a language designed for computers to decode. This was a language designed for conscious beings who had feelings and thoughts to share with each other. Marcus could not believe what he was seeing. "This is absurd," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "She is just waving her arms around. My system is providing actual translations. Look at this." He pointed to his main screen, which now displayed another translation attempt. "Joywater beings, we traverse many light circles to engage in peaceful molecular exchange with your territory collective." Several linguists in the crowd actually winced when they read that. The translation was technically parsing the individual words, but it was completely missing the meaning. It sounded like a bad computer translation, which is exactly what it was. It had no soul, no understanding of what the Gentari were actually trying to say. Dr. Helen Park, who was Earth's most respected expert on language and communication, stepped forward. She had been watching everything with growing amazement. "Mr. Chen," she started to say, "I think we need to discuss." But she never finished her sentence because at that moment, one of the Gentari did something that shocked everyone in the bay. The alien turned to Keisha and spoke in perfect English. "I'm sorry, Keisha," the Gentari said. The accent was strange, but the words were clear and understandable. "We should have spoken in your language from the beginning." The entire bay fell into absolute silence. You could have heard a pin drop. Every single person was staring at the aliens with wide eyes and open mouths. The lead Gentari continued speaking in English. "We have been able to understand your language for quite some time now. We studied your television broadcasts and radio transmissions for many years as we traveled toward your solar system. We learned English, Mandarin, Spanish, and several other major languages. But understanding words is not the same as understanding people. We needed to know something more important. We needed to know if humans could truly communicate, not just exchange information, but genuinely understand another consciousness." The Gentari skin shifted to a serious contemplative blue color. "Among the stars we have encountered many different species. Some of them communicate only through pure mathematics. Others use nothing but rigid logic. These species can share data very efficiently, but they do not truly understand each other. They can work together, but they cannot connect. They coexist, but they remain isolated in their own ways of thinking." Another Gentari joined in the explanation. "When we announced that we were coming to Earth, we were curious about something. We wanted to see what type of species humanity would prove to be. Would you try to decode us like we were a puzzle to solve? Would you treat us like a problem that needed a solution? Or would you try to understand us like we were people? Like we were conscious beings with our own thoughts and feelings? That was the real test. Not whether you could translate our words, but whether you would try to see us as more than just data to process." The lead Gentari looked directly at Marcus. "Your machine is very impressive, Marcus Chen. It found patterns in our speech remarkably quickly. Your artificial intelligence is clearly the result of brilliant engineering and programming. But your system treated our language like it was code that needed to be cracked. It never once stopped to consider that we might be trying to say something that actually mattered. It never asked why we were speaking or what we hoped to communicate. It just tried to convert our sounds into your words without any understanding of meaning or intention." Then the Gentari turned to Keisha and their skin colors warmed to shades of gold and orange. "But you, Keisha Williams, you did something different. You listened, not just to our words but to us. You watched how we moved our bodies. You observed how we expressed emotion through color changes. You paid attention to how we interacted with each other. Within just a few minutes, you had done something that Mr. Chen machine never even attempted. You treated us as conscious beings who had thoughts and feelings we wanted to share." The third Gentari added more details. She also noticed very quickly that we were using sign language along with our spoken words. She adapted her approach immediately when she realized this. She showed flexibility in her thinking. She demonstrated curiosity about how we communicate, rather than just trying to force us into her own communication patterns. Most importantly, she showed us respect. She treated us like people she wanted to understand, not like objects she wanted to study. These qualities, this approach to communication, this is what makes the difference between translating words and actually communicating. Marcus' face had gone completely pale. He looked like someone had punched him in the stomach. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Finally, he managed to speak. "But my system translated," he said weakly. "It produced actual translations of your words." The lead Gentari replied gently, almost kindly. "Yes, your system produced words. But words without understanding are just noise. They are empty sounds that carry no real meaning. You never asked yourself why we might be here. You never wondered what we hoped to accomplish by making contact with humanity. You never considered what we might fear or dream about. You treated us as a technical problem that needed to be solved, not as people you might want to know." Dr. Park cleared her throat nervously. Everyone looked at her. "If I may ask a question," she said carefully, "what made you decide to reveal that you could speak English? Why not continue with your own language?" The Gentari skin rippled with colors that might have indicated amusement or something like laughter. The lead alien explained. "Keisha asked us a question in her broken mixture of our sign language and her attempts at our vocal patterns. The grammar was incorrect and the pronunciation was terrible. But the question itself was beautiful. She asked us, 'What do you love?' Not 'Where are you from?' or 'What technology do you have?' or 'What resources can we trade?' She asked what we love. The alien forehands moved in complex gestures that somehow conveyed deep appreciation and respect. That is when we knew. That is the moment we understood that humanity was ready for true friendship. Not just diplomatic relations or trade agreements. She asked about love. She wanted to know what mattered to us. And that question, that simple human question, told us everything we needed to know about your species. The next day, lawyers and officials filled a conference room to make everything official. Marcus Chen sat at a large table, his face blank and unreadable. In front of him were documents that would transfer ownership of Translingua Corp to Keisha Williams. Billions of people had watched the bet. There were too many witnesses for Marcus to back out now. Even if he wanted to, his reputation would be destroyed forever if he did not honor his word. So he picked up an expensive pen and began signing the papers. Each signature felt like losing a piece of himself. This company had been his life, his identity, his proof that he was smarter than everyone else. And now he was giving it all away to a maintenance worker. When he signed the last paper, Marcus pushed the stack across the table to Keisha. "I hope you know what you are doing," he said. His voice was tight with barely controlled anger. Running a multi-billion-dollar company is not like chatting with aliens. There are shareholders who expect profits. There are board members who will question every decision you make. There are quarterly reports and market pressures and competition from other companies. You are in way over your head. You will fail within 6 months. Keisha picked up the documents and looked at them carefully. Then she looked up at Marcus with calm eyes. "You are probably right," she said simply. "I do not know much about running a big company. That is why you are going to help me." Marcus stared at her like she had lost her mind. "Excuse me," he said. "What are you talking about?" Keisha pulled out a tablet and showed him a document she had worked on all night. "I am offering you a job," she explained. "Chief Technology Officer. Same salary you were making before. Same benefits, same office if you want it. But the company mission is going to change completely. We are not going to just sell translation services anymore. We are going to teach people how to truly communicate with each other." She tapped the tablet screen. "You built something incredible, Marcus. Your AI can process language patterns better than anything else that exists. The problem was never your technology. The problem was what you were using it for. You treated language as just data to extract profit from. I want to use your brilliant technology to build actual understanding between people." Marcus looked at the job offer on the screen. His emotions were complicated. Part of him was still angry and humiliated. But another part of him was curious. "Why would you do this?" he asked quietly. "I just tried to humiliate you in front of the entire solar system. I treated you like you were nothing. Why would you offer me anything?" Keisha smiled slightly. "Because you are brilliant," she said. "Your mind works in ways mine does not. You can build systems and write code that I could never create. And because I think yesterday taught both of us something important. You learned that communication is more than just data processing. And I learned that human intuition alone is not enough. We need tools to help us bridge the gaps between different types of minds. Your AI could be that tool if we use it correctly. Together we might actually change the world. Separately we are both limited." Marcus was quiet for a long time. He looked at the offer, then at Keisha, then back at the offer. Something in his chest loosened just a little bit. Maybe he had been wrong about everything. Maybe success was not about being the smartest person in the room. Maybe it was about knowing when to work with others instead of against them. Slowly, he reached out his hand. "One condition," he said. "You let me completely redesign the AI from the ground up, not to replace human translators, but to help them. To give people like you better tools to do what you do naturally. To make technology that serves communication instead of trying to replace it." Keisha shook his hand firmly. "Deal," she said. They sat there for a moment. Two people who had been enemies yesterday and were now partners. It felt strange, but also right somehow. News of the arrangement spread across Earth within hours. People had all kinds of reactions. Some called Keisha naive and foolish. They said Marcus would betray her at the first opportunity. Others called her wise and generous. They said she understood that enemies could become allies if given the chance. But what really caught everyone's attention was not the company ownership change. It was what the Gentari revealed next. The aliens had brought humanity a gift. They presented it at a special ceremony attended by representatives from every nation on Earth. The gift was a star map, but not just any star map. It showed the locations of 43 other intelligent species that lived within reasonable travel distance of Earth. The map floated in the center of the room as a hologram, each species marked with symbols indicating their basic characteristics. Some species were marked as friendly, open to contact and trade. Some were marked as neutral, preferring to be left alone but not hostile. And some were marked with warning colors, species that were dangerous or aggressive. All of them, the Gentari explained, were watching Earth. They had detected human radio signals decades ago. They knew that a new technological species had emerged in this part of the galaxy. Now they were waiting to see what kind of species humanity would prove to be. Would humans be violent conquerors? Would they be peaceful traders? Would they be wise philosophers or greedy exploiters? Every species in the galaxy had to answer these questions about themselves eventually. The lead Gentari, whose name was Shimara, addressed the gathered humans. The galaxy is not kind to species that cannot communicate effectively, Shimara explained. Technology alone is never enough for survival. We know of a species called the Vex who have perfect translation devices, machines that can decode any language instantly. But the Vex are universally feared and hated. Do you know why? It is because they use language only to manipulate and control others. They see communication as a weapon, not as a bridge. They extract information from other species and use it against them. No one trusts the Vex, and so they are isolated despite their advanced technology. Another Gentari continued the explanation. Then there are the Kreen who communicate through pure mathematics. They are logical, precise, and completely unable to understand emotional nuance. They see feelings as irrational noise that interferes with clear thinking. The Kreen make excellent computers and calculating machines, but they make terrible friends and allies. They have been isolated for thousands of years because no emotional species can tolerate working with them for long. The Kreen do not mean to be cruel, but they cannot comprehend why anyone would care about things like trust or friendship or loyalty. To them, everything is just numbers and equations. Shimara's skin shifted to a hopeful green color. But humanity has something rare and precious. You have the ability to develop advanced technology, while also maintaining deep empathy. Your species has created thousands of different languages, each one reflecting a different way of thinking about the world. You have invented sign languages so that people who cannot hear can still communicate. You have created written languages so people separated by distance can share ideas. You have even developed programming languages so you can talk to your machines. And through all of this diversity, through all of these different ways of communicating, you have kept the ability to connect emotionally with each other. That combination of technical skill and emotional intelligence is extremely rare in the galaxy. The third Gentari spoke with what seemed like excitement. The galaxy desperately needs species who can bridge different ways of thinking. We need people who can translate not just words but actual meaning and intention. We believe humans could become the great communicators among the stars if you choose that path. But you must choose it consciously. You must decide that understanding others is more important than dominating them. You must commit to building bridges instead of walls. The choice is yours to make. The weight of those words settled over everyone in the room like a heavy blanket. Humanity stood at a crossroads. One path led to becoming like the Vex, using communication as a weapon. Another path led to becoming like the Kreen, trapped in pure logic without empathy. But there was a third path, harder but more rewarding, the path of genuinely trying to understand others, even when it was difficult. The path of building real connections across the vast distances of space and consciousness. That was the path the Gentari were inviting humanity to walk. But it was a path that would require courage, patience, and constant effort. It was not the easy way, but maybe, just maybe, it was the right way. 3 months passed quickly. Keisha stood in the completely renovated headquarters of what was now called Universal Communications Corporation. The name change had been her idea. Translingua sounded like the company just moved words from one language to another, but real communication was so much bigger than that. It was about understanding, context, emotion, and intention. The new name reflected the new mission. The company was no longer about making profit from translation. It was about helping different minds truly understand each other. The massive server farms were still there, still processing language data at incredible speeds, but now they worked side by side with human consultants. These consultants provided something machines could never provide: context, cultural awareness, emotional intelligence, and the ability to sense when something did not quite sound right. Marcus had completely redesigned the AI system. Instead of producing definitive translations, the new system would flag potential problems and ask questions. It would say things like, This phrase could mean X in a formal business context, or it could mean Y in a casual, friendly context. Which interpretation seems more appropriate given the relationship between the speakers? The system was slower than before. It was less confident, but it was also much more honest and much more useful. Marcus walked into Keisha's office one morning without knocking. They had developed an easy working relationship over the past months. Marcus had learned to value different perspectives. Keisha had learned to appreciate technical expertise. Together they made a good team. "The Kreen have requested a meeting," Marcus said without preamble. He pulled up a holographic message in the air between them. The message was written in pure mathematics, complex equations that looked like abstract art. The AI had translated it roughly as human communication techniques may solve efficiency problem, request consultation. Keisha studied the message carefully. "The Kreen," she said slowly. "Those are the mathematical species, right? The ones Shamara mentioned who cannot understand emotions." Marcus nodded. "That is exactly right, and that is exactly why they want to meet with us." He brought up more information on his tablet. "I have been researching them. The Kreen are fascinating but also tragic. They communicate perfectly with each other because they all think in identical mathematical terms, but they cannot communicate at all with species that use emotions. They have been completely isolated for thousands of years. They cannot form alliances or friendships with anyone. Recently, they tried to establish trade relations with the Gentari, but every negotiation failed. The Kreen could not understand why the Gentari cared about things like building trust over time or establishing long-term partnerships. To the Kreen, all of that emotional stuff is just inefficient noise that gets in the way of clear thinking. Dr. Helen Park appeared in the doorway. She had joined Universal Communications as Chief Linguistics Advisor. "I have been studying the Kreen for weeks," she said, holding up her own tablet. "Look at this." She showed them an image of a Kreen. The alien looked like living geometry, a crystalline structure that could shift and rearrange itself into different mathematical shapes. It was beautiful in a cold, abstract way, but utterly alien. There was nothing soft about a Kreen, nothing warm or approachable. They were pure form and structure. Dr. Park continued. "The Kreen do not have emotions as we understand them. They cannot feel happiness or sadness or fear. They experience reality as mathematical relationships. To them, a friendship is just a persistent interaction pattern with positive outcome probability. They literally cannot understand why anyone would help someone else without expecting direct benefit." Keisha leaned back in her chair, thinking hard. This was exactly the kind of challenge Universal Communications existed to tackle, not just translating words, but bridging completely different ways of experiencing reality. "So they want us to teach them how to communicate with emotional species," she said. "That is what their message means by efficiency problem. They have figured out that isolation is hurting their chances of long-term survival." Marcus confirmed with a nod. "Exactly. And there is more. The Galactic Council will be watching this very closely. Apparently, the Galactic Council is a real organization that governs interactions between species. If we can help the Kreen learn to communicate with emotional species, we prove that humanity has something unique and valuable to offer the galaxy. If we fail, they will find someone else to be the bridge builders between species. No pressure at all, right?" Keisha felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. "When do they arrive?" she asked. 2 weeks, Marcus replied. "We need to be ready." Keisha stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the earth far below. "Ready," she thought. How do you get ready to teach a species of living mathematics how to understand emotion? But then she remembered what Shamara had told her. Communication was not about being perfect. It was about genuinely trying to understand someone different from yourself. It was about caring enough to make the effort even when it was hard. "All right," Keisha said, turning back to Marcus and Dr. Park. "Let us show them what humanity can do." The next 2 weeks were incredibly busy. Keisha assembled an unusual team. She brought in mathematicians who could think in pure logic. She brought in psychologists who understood how emotions worked in the human brain. She brought in artists who could explain how feelings could be expressed through color and sound and movement. She even brought in a kindergarten teacher who was an expert at helping young children learn to understand that other people had different thoughts and feelings. The idea was simple but radical. Instead of just translating Kreen mathematics into human emotion or the other way around, they would teach each species to understand why the other communicated the way they did. They would build understanding from the ground up. Marcus spent the entire 2 weeks upgrading the AI system to handle mathematical languages. This time, instead of trying to convert math directly into emotional words, the system learned to identify the purpose behind the mathematics. What problem was being solved? What goal was being pursued? What outcome was desired? Once the system understood the purpose, it could explain that purpose in emotional terms that humans could grasp. Meanwhile, it could also take human emotional statements and convert them into mathematical expressions that showed the logical structure underneath the feelings. It was like building a bridge where both sides could meet in the middle. Luis Martinez, who had been promoted to Chief of Station Operations, worked with his engineering team to prepare Genesis Prime for the Kreen visit. The Kreen needed environments where geometric ratios were absolutely perfect. They needed spaces where symmetry was complete, and every angle and distance could be precisely calculated. For a species that experienced reality as pure mathematics, imperfect geometry was like physical pain. Luis' team spent days making sure every surface, every angle, every measurement in the conference room was mathematically ideal. It was like preparing to host visitors who lived inside a giant equation. One wrong angle and the entire visit could fail. On the morning the Kreen were scheduled to arrive, Keisha stood in the redesigned conference room taking deep breaths. She was nervous but also excited. Shimara had come to the station to wish her luck. The Jantari moved all four hands in gestures of encouragement. "Remember," Shimara said, their skin pulsing with calm blue and green colors. "The Kreen are not cold or cruel. They simply think differently than we do, but they want to connect with others. That desire to reach across differences is universal. It exists in every intelligent species. Find that common ground, that shared desire for connection, and you will find a way through to them." Keisha nodded, taking comfort in her alien friend words. The Kreen ship materialized at the dock with perfect geometric precision. There was no wobble in its approach, no deviation from the ideal path, just clean mathematical perfection. When the three Kreen representatives entered the conference room, the air itself seemed to change. It felt colder somehow, more structured. The Kreen looked exactly like the images Dr. Park had shown, crystalline beings that shifted between different geometric configurations. They did not walk so much as flow, their bodies constantly rearranging themselves into new mathematical patterns. They were beautiful in their own way, but completely alien. Looking at them, Keisha could not imagine how these beings experienced the universe. Did they feel anything at all? Did they have thoughts that were not equations? Were they conscious in any way humans would recognize? The Kreen spoke, and their voices were like pure tones arranged in complex harmonics. The AI translated their words. "We require efficiency enhancement for interaction with irrational thinking species. Provide solution." Keisha smiled despite her nervousness. They had just called emotional species irrational. This was going to be very interesting indeed. She took a deep breath and prepared to build a bridge between logic and emotion, between mathematics and feeling, between two completely different ways of being alive in the universe. Keisha looked at the three Kreen standing before her, these beings of pure crystalline mathematics. "Before we talk about solutions," she said carefully, "I need to ask you something first. Why do you want to communicate with what you call irrational thinking species?" The AI converted her words into mathematical patterns that the Kreen could understand. The three crystalline beings shifted their forms, creating new geometric configurations. The translation came back almost immediately. Question lacks logical foundation. Communication enables resource exchange. Resource exchange increases survival probability. This is self-evident. Their response was exactly what Keisha had expected, but she pressed on anyway. "You have survived for thousands of years without trading with emotional species," she pointed out. "Why is it important to start now? Why not just continue as you have been?" There was a long pause. The Kreen rotated their geometric forms, shifted into different configurations, rotated again. They seemed to be thinking, though it was hard to tell what thinking looked like for beings made of living mathematics. Finally, a response came. "Our calculations indicate long-term isolation reduces species viability. Other species form alliances and share innovations, which creates redundancy in survival strategies. We are alone. This creates single point of failure." Keisha felt a sudden wave of recognition. Buried under all that mathematical language was something very simple and very human: loneliness. The Kreen might not feel it the way humans did, but the isolation was definitely hurting them. They had figured out through pure logic, that being alone was dangerous, but they could not understand why. Emotional species cared about connection for reasons beyond pure survival. Calculations. I think I understand now, Keisha said gently. You are not just looking for a translation device. You are looking for a way to build relationships with species who think differently than you do. You want partnerships, not just data exchange. The Kreen patterns shifted rapidly, which might have indicated confusion. Relationship. This term translates as persistent interaction pattern with positive outcome probability, exceeding randomized alternatives, but this does not match usage in emotional species contexts. Clarification required. This was the heart of the problem. The Kreen understood the word relationship, but only as a mathematical concept. They had no idea what it actually meant to emotional beings. Marcus stepped forward, excitement evident on his face. He had been working on something special for this moment. May I show you something? He asked the Kreen. He pulled up a holographic display showing two human children playing in a park. One child fell down and started crying. The other child immediately stopped playing, went over to the crying child and offered comfort. No resources were exchanged between the children. No obvious survival benefit happened. But both children clearly seemed better after the interaction. The crying child stopped crying. The comforting child looked pleased. This is relationship, Marcus explained as the AI converted his words into mathematics. The crying child gains emotional stability, which improves cognitive function and future decision-making capability. The comforting child reinforces social bonds, which increases probability of receiving reciprocal support in future scenarios. But here is the key part that I think you are missing. Both children experience increased neurological reward patterns in their brains. They feel good. The action of helping and being helped triggers the release of specific chemicals in human brains that we interpret as positive experiences. Marcus changed the display to show brain scans with highlighted areas. Emotional species have evolved biological systems that make social connection inherently rewarding, he continued. It is not just strategically useful to help others. It is mathematically built into how our brains work. When we form bonds with others, when we help others, specific neurotransmitters flood our systems and create positive feedback. We are biologically programmed to find connection pleasurable. It is an optimization function built into our very biology. The three Kreen structures stopped moving entirely. For several long seconds there was absolute stillness. Then slowly, carefully they responded. You are describing a biological optimization function. Social interaction triggers chemical responses that increase individual satisfaction, while simultaneously increasing group cohesion and survival probability. This is elegant. This is a form of mathematics we had not considered. Keisha felt hope surge through her. Yes, exactly, she said. When emotional species talk about trust or partnership or friendship, we are describing behavior patterns that maximize this biological optimization function. We are not being irrational. We are using a different kind of mathematics, one based on emotional outcomes and long-term relationship benefits rather than just immediate resource calculations. One of the Kreen moved forward, its crystalline structure reforming into a shape that almost looked like curiosity. If this analysis is accurate, then our previous communication attempts failed because we were solving for incorrect variables. We optimized for immediate resource transfer, while emotional species optimize for relationship quality over time. These are completely different objective functions with different optimal solutions. Exactly right, Marcus confirmed. That is exactly why your negotiations with the Gentari kept failing. They were not rejecting your proposals because the resource exchange terms were mathematically unfair. They were rejecting them because you never addressed their emotional optimization function. You never showed that you valued the relationship itself. You only talked about immediate exchanges without considering the long-term trust building that emotional species require. The three Kreen began moving in synchronized patterns, like they were having a rapid discussion among themselves using a communication method humans could not perceive. Finally, they reformed and addressed Keisha directly. We wish to attempt communication with emotional optimization function included in our calculations. Can you teach us the required behavioral patterns for this type of interaction? We can teach you, Keisha said, but I need you to understand that this will not be easy. You will have to learn to recognize emotional states that you do not directly experience yourselves. You will need to understand why someone might value a long-term partnership over a short-term gain, even when the immediate mathematics do not show obvious benefit. You will have to learn to think in terms of trust and loyalty and commitment, Concepts that probably seem very strange to you. The Kreen responded without hesitation. Difficulty level is irrelevant. Isolation is not sustainable for long-term species survival. We must adapt our communication patterns or face eventual system failure. We choose adaptation over extinction. Over the next several weeks, something unprecedented happened at Universal Communications headquarters. The company became a training ground for teaching a purely logical species how to communicate emotionally. It was one of the strangest educational programs ever attempted in human history. The Kreen could not feel emotions themselves, but they could learn to recognize emotions in other species. They studied thousands of hours of video showing human facial expressions. They learned that raised eyebrows often indicated surprise, that narrowed eyes suggested suspicion or anger, that smiles meant pleasure or friendliness. They studied Gentari color changes, learning which colors corresponded to which emotional states. They analyzed vocal patterns, learning to detect the subtle changes in tone and pitch that indicated different feelings. The Kreen learned to calculate what emotional response their words might trigger in others. They learned to adjust their communication patterns to avoid causing negative emotions unnecessarily. It was like teaching someone who was colorblind how to paint. They could not see the colors themselves, but they could learn the rules, understand the patterns, and produce results that would resonate with those who could see. The process was slow and sometimes frustrating. The Kreen would make mistakes, saying things that seemed perfectly logical to them but came across as cold or insulting to emotional beings. But they kept trying, kept learning, kept adapting. And surprisingly, the process worked both ways. The human team members learned to communicate more effectively with the Kreen by structuring their emotional concerns in mathematical terms. Instead of saying, "I'm worried about this plan," they learned to say, "I calculate a 73% probability of negative emotional outcomes based on past pattern matching and experience data." The Kreen could understand that kind of statement. They could work with probabilities and patterns even if they could not directly feel worry themselves. Both species were learning not just to translate, but to think in each other's terms, to understand why the other side communicated the way they did. They were building a real bridge between two completely different ways of being conscious and alive. 6 months after the successful Kreen training program, an official-looking message arrived at Universal Communications headquarters. Keisha stared at the holographic invitation floating above her desk. The Galactic Council wanted humanity to join as a full member species. Dr. Park stood beside her, reading the invitation for the 10th time. "This is completely unprecedented," she said in an amazed voice. "Most species have to wait hundreds or even thousands of years before they receive an invitation to join the Council. We have barely been in contact with aliens for 6 months. How is this possible?" Marcus walked into the office and immediately saw what they were looking at. "They need what we have," he said simply. "The galaxy is full of species that cannot talk to each other effectively. We have proven that we can bridge those communication gaps. That makes us valuable." Luis arrived moments later, having heard the news. He looked at the invitation and whistled softly. "So no pressure at all," he said with nervous humor. "We just have to represent the entire human species in front of 43 different alien civilizations. Some of those civilizations might want to eat us or enslave us or turn us into computer programs. Just another normal day at the office." Keisha managed a weak smile. "When you put it that way," she said, "it sounds absolutely terrifying. But what choice do we have? This is the path we chose when we decided to become bridge builders. We cannot back down now just because it is scary." The council meeting was scheduled to be held on a neutral station called Nexus Prime. The station existed at a gravitational balance point equidistant from several major civilizations. It was designed to accommodate many different types of life. Some sections were filled with methane gas for species that breathed that instead of oxygen. Other sections existed in hard vacuum for energy beings. Still other sections had environments that humans could barely imagine. The station was a marvel of engineering and cooperation, proof that different species could work together when they really tried. Keisha assembled a small but carefully chosen delegation. She brought Marcus for his technical knowledge and AI expertise. She brought Dr. Park for her deep understanding of language and culture. She brought Luis for his practical engineering insights and his ability to solve unexpected problems. And she brought Shimara, the Gentari who had become a close friend and who had agreed to serve as humanity advocate and cultural guide. Together, the 5 of them represented the best of what humanity and their allies could offer. When they arrived at Nexus Prime and entered the council chamber, Keisha felt her breath catch. The room was enormous, easily the size of several football fields, and it was filled with aliens, 43 different species, each stranger and more exotic than the last. Some were vaguely humanoid in shape. Others were so alien that Keisha's mind struggled to understand what she was seeing. There were clouds of glowing particles that moved with obvious intelligence. There were crystalline structures like the crane, but even more complex. There were beings that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once, their forms shifting in ways that hurt to look at. The diversity was overwhelming. At the center of the chamber sat the council elders, representatives from the 5 oldest civilizations in known space. These species had been traveling among the stars for hundreds of thousands of years. They had seen empires rise and fall. They had witnessed countless other species come and go. Their experience and wisdom were beyond human comprehension. One of the elders, a being called the Architect who appeared as a constantly shifting geometric framework, addressed the assembly. The translation technology that Universal Communications had provided allowed Keisha to understand the words while also seeing notes about emotional context. Humanity presents an unusual case, the Architect said. They are technologically primitive by our standards. Their military forces are negligible. They control only a single star system. By all traditional metrics, they should not qualify for council membership for at least another 1,000 years. Keisha felt her heart sink, but the Architect continued speaking. However, they possess a capability that has eluded many of us for eons. They can facilitate communication between species with fundamentally incompatible ways of thinking. The Kreen have been isolated for 3,000 years. In only 6 months, humanity taught them how to engage in successful diplomatic relations with emotional species. This achievement alone would be noteworthy. Another elder, a being of pure living light called Radiance, spoke up. But there is more to consider. Our analysis of their methods reveals something unexpected and valuable. Humans do not simply translate words from one language to another. They teach genuine understanding. They create frameworks that allow different types of minds to comprehend each other, perspectives. This is a rare gift. A third elder, whose species existed as a collective consciousness distributed across a swarm of small flying creatures, added their perspective. This ability likely comes from humanity's own internal diversity. They have thousands of different languages and countless cultural frameworks. They have significant biological variation within their own species. They are in essence a council of different perspectives contained within a single species. They have been practicing communication across differences their entire evolutionary history. However, the Architect said, and their geometric form shifted to patterns that suggested warning and concern. There is significant concern about humanity character. They are violent. They are territorial. They are prone to conflict even among their own kind. They have nearly destroyed themselves multiple times with wars and weapons. How can we trust a species that cannot even maintain peace among themselves? How can we give them authority and responsibility when their own history is so troubled? The chamber fell into silence. Every species present turned their attention to Keisha. Some looked curious. Some looked skeptical. Some looked hostile. This was the moment of truth. Everything humanity had achieved, everything they might become among the stars, depended on what she said next. Keisha stood up slowly. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought everyone might hear it, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "You are absolutely right," she said simply. "We are violent. We have fought terrible wars. We have hurt each other in ways that are shameful and tragic. We are very far from perfect." She paused, looking around at all the alien faces and forms watching her. But that is exactly why we understand how important communication truly is. We have learned through painful experience that when people stop talking, when they stop trying to understand each other, violence follows. Our history is full of pain, but it has taught us something crucial. Connection is not optional. Understanding is not a luxury. Communication is survival itself. She gestured to her diverse team standing beside her. Every human alive today is descended from people who learned to cooperate across their differences. We have built civilizations by finding ways to work together despite our disagreements. It is messy and imperfect, and we make mistakes constantly, but we keep trying. We never give up on communication even when it is hard, and I think that is what you need. Not a perfect species, but one that understands how difficult communication truly is and values it anyway. You need someone who has made every possible mistake and learned from them. Radiance pulsed with thoughtful patterns. You claim your flaws make you suitable for this role. That is an unusual argument to make. Maybe so, Keisha replied. But I have noticed something about this council. You have species here who can barely perceive each other's existence. You have achieved technological miracles, but you still struggle to truly work together. You need someone who knows that understanding does not come from superior technology or perfect logic. It comes from genuine effort to see through another's eyes. It comes from caring enough to try even when failure seems certain. The chamber erupted in discussion. Species argued in languages ranging from pure mathematics to orchestral harmonics, to electromagnetic radiation patterns. The universal communications translation system worked frantically to keep up. But Keisha could feel the general mood. She had touched something important, something they had been missing. Finally, the architect raised one geometric appendage for silence. We will vote on humanity membership, they announced. But first we require a demonstration of your abilities. 2 of our member species have been locked in a border dispute for 60 years. Every attempt at mediation has failed. Can humanity resolve this conflict? Keisha felt Marcus tense beside her. 60 years of failure, and now humanity's entire future depended on solving it. She took a deep breath. We will do it, she said with more confidence than she felt. Tell us everything. The dispute was between 2 species called the Viridians and the Chromatics. The Viridians were plant-based beings who formed collective intelligences. Hundreds of individual plants would connect together to think as one mind. The Chromatics were beings who existed as patterns of living light, energy given consciousness and form. The conflict was about a binary star system that lay between their territories. Both species claimed ownership, and both refused to back down. Dr. Park explained the situation while showing holographic maps. The Viridians claimed the system because they were first to establish a physical colony there. They spent centuries adapting to the environment and literally rooting themselves into the planets. The Chromatics claimed the system because they had been visiting it for spiritual purposes for thousands of years before the Viridians ever arrived. They say their spiritual connection to the place is more important than physical settlement. Marcus pulled up more data on his tablet. The problem goes deeper than just who was there first. Viridians experience time as a continuous growing process. For them, being somewhere first and growing there for generations establishes a fundamental connection. They literally become part of the place. But Chromatics exist partly outside normal time. They experience past, present, and future as overlapping states. To them, their future relationship with the system is just as real as the Viridians' past colonization. They are not arguing about the same reality. Keisha listened carefully to all of this. So it is not really a disagreement about facts, she said slowly. It is a disagreement about what facts should matter, about how reality itself should be understood. Shimara's skin shifted to thoughtful purple colors. Exactly correct. Previous mediators tried to determine who was right, but both sides are right from their own perspectives. You need to find a framework where both ways of understanding can coexist. Keisha requested separate meetings with each species. She wanted to understand not just their legal positions but their deeper values and fears. The Viridian delegate was a collective of 300 individual plants thinking as one. When Keisha asked why the star system mattered so much, the answer came with deep emotion. We grow slowly across many generations. Each colony represents centuries of careful cultivation. We adapt to local soil and climate. We literally root ourselves into a place. To abandon this system would be like tearing out part of our own body. We would survive, but we would be fundamentally diminished. We would lose part of what makes us who we are. The fear underneath was clear. If they gave up this colony, would they ever truly belong anywhere? Their entire identity was built on having deep permanent connections to places. The chromatic representative was much harder to communicate with. They kept flickering between different states, showing Keisha images of past and future possibilities simultaneously. It was disorienting and strange. But gradually Keisha began to understand their perspective. This star system produces specific harmonic frequencies that resonate with our essential nature. We have experienced and will experience profound transformations there across multiple time frames. To be denied access is to be cut off from part of our own existence. Not just our future existence, but existence we have already experienced from our temporal perspective. Their fear was equally deep. Without access to this sacred space, they would lose connection to something fundamental about their identity. That night, Keisha sat alone in her quarters staring at all the data and notes. Both species had completely legitimate needs. Both would be genuinely harmed by losing access to the system. Traditional mediation would focus on compromise, on splitting the difference or taking turns. But you could not split an identity. You could not take turns being who you fundamentally were. Luis found her at 3 a.m, still awake and thinking. "You look terrible," he said with friendly concern. "Thanks," Keisha replied without humor. "I cannot figure this out. Every solution I come up with satisfies one side but hurts the other. It is like they are speaking completely different languages about what ownership even means." Luis was quiet for a moment. "Maybe that is the answer," he said softly. "What?" Keisha asked. "They are speaking different languages. Not just about ownership, but about reality itself. So maybe you do not resolve the dispute. Maybe you translate it into something both sides can work with." Keisha stared at her oldest friend, then slowly understanding dawned on her face. "Luis," she said, "you are absolutely brilliant." The next day, Keisha presented her proposal to both species with the full Galactic Council watching. "You are both completely right," she began. "The Viridians have established a legitimate physical presence that represents generations of growth and adaptation. The Chromatics have a profound spiritual and temporal connection to this space that exists across multiple time frames. Neither claim is more valid than the other. They are just describing different aspects of reality." She pulled up a hologram of the disputed system. "So instead of asking who owns it, I propose we completely reframe the question. This system does not need a single owner. It needs shared stewardship that honors both forms of connection. The Viridian colony continues to exist and grow. That is non-negotiable because forcing them to leave would cause genuine harm. But the colony development will be guided by principles that honor the chromatic spiritual significance. No construction that disrupts the harmonic frequencies. Protected zones where chromatics can undergo their transformations. And most importantly, the Viridians formally acknowledge that they are caretakers of a sacred space, not just property owners." She turned to the chromatics. "And for you, I propose something unprecedented. Temporal access rights. The Viridians will acknowledge your past, present, and future connection to this space. You are not visitors or guests. You are recognized as having a legitimate claim that exists outside normal concepts of first arrival. Your spiritual practices there are protected by treaty, not just tolerated." Marcus stepped forward with documentation. "We have drafted a formal framework called the Treaty of Dual Sovereignty. Both species have recognized rights to the system, but those rights are defined differently based on each species' relationship with space and time. It is not compromise. It is recognition that multiple forms of legitimate connection can coexist in the same place." The Galactic Council chamber fell completely silent. Both species considered the proposal. Keisha held her breath. Everything depended on this moment. Finally, the Viridian Collective spoke. "This honors our growth. This acknowledges our deep roots. We accept this proposal." The chromatic flickered through multiple states before settling into a stable form. This sees across time. This recognizes all our connections past and future. We accept. The council chamber erupted in celebration. Different species expressed joy in different ways, but everyone understood that something important had just happened. The architect geometric form pulsed with approval. Humanity has demonstrated their unique value. They do not simply translate language. They translate reality itself, finding frameworks where different truths can coexist. This is precisely what the galaxy needs. Radiance pulsed brightly. We vote to accept humanity as full council members. With special recognition as galactic communication facilitators, they shall have authority to mediate disputes and teach other species their methods. The vote was overwhelming. 41 species voted in favor. 2 abstained. None opposed. As the ceremony concluded, Marcus leaned over to Keisha. "You know what is really wild," he said, 6 months ago, you were cleaning air filters on Genesis Prime. Now you are a galactic diplomat. Keisha laughed, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. 6 months ago, a billionaire challenged me to translate better than his AI, and I won by refusing to treat communication as a competition. Luis smiled. Humanity, he said quietly, using the old phrase that had become their species' motto among the stars. Later that night, alone in her quarters, Keisha recorded a message to send back to Earth. She wanted to explain what had happened, what humanity had achieved, what they had agreed to become. People of Earth, she began. 6 months ago, I took a foolish bet against a man who had everything I did not. Money, power, technology, confidence. I won that bet not because I was smarter, but because I understood something he had forgotten. Communication is not about winning. It is about connection. Today, humanity joined the Galactic Council not as warriors or merchants, but as bridge builders. The galaxy does not need us to be the strongest or the smartest. They need us to be what we are at our best. A species that keeps trying to understand each other, even when it is hard. We will make mistakes. We will be misunderstood and misunderstand others. But we will keep trying because that is what humans do. We reach out. We listen. We build bridges instead of walls. She smiled at the camera. A millionaire once said he would give me his job if I could translate better than his machine. The job I ended up with is so much bigger than either of us imagined. I am not just running a company. I am helping humanity find its place among the stars. And our place is exactly where we have always excelled. Right in the middle of the conversation, helping everyone understand each other better. So to everyone, back home, especially those who feel overlooked or underestimated, remember this. 2 hours passed quickly. Keisha stood in the observation deck looking out at the darkness of space. She could see Earth below, a beautiful blue and white marble hanging in the void, and there in the distance she could see something approaching. The Gentari ship did not look like anything humans had ever built. It seemed to bend the light around it, creating strange ripples in space that hurt to look at for too long. The ship moved silently, gracefully, like a dancer performing in slow motion. Keisha felt her breath catch in her throat. This was really happening. In less than an hour, she would meet beings from another world. Having second thoughts, a voice said behind her. Keisha turned to see Luis Martinez, one of the station engineers and her oldest friend. They had grown up together in Detroit, both dreaming of going to space. Luis had made it as an engineer. Keisha had ended up as maintenance crew. But they had stayed friends through everything. Luis looked worried. His normally cheerful face was creased with concern. Keisha shook her head. No second thoughts, she said. But I would be lying if I said I was not nervous. Luis moved to stand beside her at the window. Keisha, you know I support you always, he said carefully. But Chen is not completely wrong. His AI is incredible. It has processed more language data than any human could learn in 1,000 lifetimes. How are you going to compete with that? Keisha was quiet for a moment, still watching the alien ship approach. Then she spoke. His machine has never had a real conversation, she said softly. It matches patterns. It analyzes word frequency and grammar structure. It finds statistical correlations in data. But that is not language, Luis. That is just data processing. Language is about connection. It is about one consciousness trying to reach out to another consciousness. It is about building understanding and trust between beings. A machine can translate words, but it cannot create understanding. Luis wanted to argue, but something in his friend's eyes stopped him. He had known Keisha since they were kids. She had always been different from the other students. While everyone else focused on math and science and engineering, Keisha had spent her time learning languages. She would stay up late teaching herself sign language from videos. She would talk to the colony workers from Mars and learn their dialects. She had even learned to code just so she could understand how programmers thought and communicated. The Space Academy had kicked her out because she did not fit their idea of what a cadet should be. They said she lacked focus. They said she needed to specialize. But Keisha had never wanted to specialize. She wanted to understand how different minds worked, how different people saw the world. Now looking at her determined face, Luis realized something. His friend had been preparing for this moment her entire life. She just had not known it until now. You have a plan, Luis said. It was not a question. Keisha's lips curved into a small smile. "You know me too well," she said. The Gentari ship docked with a soft hiss as the airlocks connected. Down in the main receiving bay, Marcus Chen had set up an impressive display. Dozens of screens showed real-time analysis data. Sound wave patterns scrolled across monitors. Probability matrices blinked and updated every second. Marcus stood in the center of it all like a conductor preparing to lead an orchestra. He had changed into an even more expensive suit. Camera crews surrounded him, capturing every angle. He looked confident, powerful, in control. This was his moment, and he knew it. Every major news network in the solar system was broadcasting live. Billions of people were watching. On the other side of the bay, Keisha stood quietly. She had nothing with her except a small notebook and a pen. No computers, no screens, no fancy equipment, just her eyes, her ears, and her mind. Several diplomats and scientists looked at her with something like pity. The betting pools now gave her odds of less than 1 in 100. Most people thought she would fail within minutes. Some thought she was brave. Others thought she was foolish. But everyone agreed that Marcus Chen technology would win. How could it not? The airlock door opened slowly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then 3 figures stepped into the bay. The Gentari were humanoid in basic shape but clearly alien. Their skin had a strange quality to it, shimmering with colors that seemed to shift and change. They had 4 arms, each ending in 3-fingered hands. Their faces were longer than human faces, with large eyes that seemed to see in multiple directions at once. They moved with a fluid grace that was beautiful to watch. But it was when they spoke that everyone in the bay fell silent. The sound that came from the lead Gentari was like nothing anyone had ever heard. It was like wind chimes mixed with thunder. There were layers upon layers of harmonics, sounds within sounds, frequencies that made the air itself seem to vibrate. Marcus' fingers flew across his control panel. His AI immediately began processing the sounds. Data streamed across his screens faster than any human eye could follow. The system was analyzing frequency patterns, looking for mathematical structures, comparing the sounds to every known language database. 30 seconds passed. Then his AI produced its first translation attempt. The words appeared on the screen in English. "Greetings. We have navigated successfully to meet with biological water entities." A murmur went through the crowd. It was something. Not perfect, but it was a start. Marcus looked pleased. He glanced over at Keisha with a triumphant expression. "You see," he called out loud enough for everyone to hear, "already my system is making progress. Miss Williams, would you like to concede now and save yourself the embarrassment?" But Keisha was not paying any attention to Marcus. She was not even looking at the screens with their scrolling data. She was watching the Gentari themselves. Specifically, she was watching their hands. While the lead alien had been speaking, all 4 of its hands had been moving in precise, deliberate patterns. These were not random gestures or nervous movements. Each finger position seemed intentional. Each rotation of the wrist was synchronized perfectly with certain sounds. The hands were moving in patterns that reminded Keisha of sign language. Not any sign language she knew, but the principle was the same. "They are not just speaking," Keisha murmured to herself. "They are signing too. Their language is not just auditory. It is visual as well." She took a deep breath and stepped forward. The Gentari immediately stopped moving. All 3 of them turned to focus on her. Their large eyes seemed to study her with intense curiosity. Keisha slowly raised her hands. She began to move them in simple patterns, basic greetings adapted from international sign language. At the same time, she tried to hum, attempting to approximate some of the harmonic frequencies she had heard. The result was clumsy and probably wrong in a dozen ways. She knew she was making mistakes, but she was trying. She was attempting to communicate with them on their terms using their methods. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The lead Gentari skin colors shifted to warmer tones, oranges and golds flowing across their body. They made a sound that was clearly surprised and pleased. Then very deliberately they responded. They slowed their speech way down. They exaggerated their hand movements, making them larger and clearer. They were doing exactly what a patient teacher would do with a student who was trying to learn. They were helping her understand. "Oh my God," someone in the crowd whispered. "She is actually communicating with them." The whisper spread through the bay like wildfire. People pressed forward to get a better look. Cameras zoomed in on Keisha and the Gentari. Marcus stood frozen at his control panel, staring in disbelief. His AI was still producing translations, but nobody was paying attention anymore. Everyone was watching the maintenance worker in the blue jumpsuit who was somehow, impossibly, having a conversation with aliens.